Hi, my name's Pip. I'm from Humanitarian Advisory Group, a social enterprise based in Melbourne. Thank you so much for hosting me today. I, of course, can't be there, but I really hope you enjoy the day and discussing diversity and inclusion in the humanitarian sector. Today, I'm here to talk to you about research that we're conducting, data on diversity, humanitarian leadership under the spotlight. Before I get into it, I'll just tell you a little bit about Humanitarian Advisory Group. We're a social enterprise based in Melbourne, Australia. We want to bring fresh thinking to challenge the status quo of humanitarian aid. We want to be part of the story that tracks humanitarian action from its current conundrum, humanitarian need outstripping the capacity and agility of the sector, to one that realises its future potential. A sector that challenges power structures and transforms the way that people are treated in crises around the world. As you can see, we provide monitoring and evaluation, research and policy development, training and advisory services to a number of different humanitarian actors, including international and national NGOs, the Red Cross movement, governments, UN agencies, private sector, academic bodies and peak bodies and consortiums. So we'll jump right into it. Why explore diverse leadership? Humanitarian Advisory Group is undertaking research to understand how diverse and inclusive leadership within the sector can contribute to tackling some of the challenges that face the humanitarian system, and to create an evidence base for increasing diversity in leadership teams. The humanitarian landscape is changing rapidly, with greater humanitarian need than ever before, funding shortfalls, and increasingly complex humanitarian disasters. Increasing need and complexity means the demand on humanitarian leadership is mounting, including to enable and guide organisations to respond more quickly and effectively. So how do we strengthen humanitarian leadership to make it fit for purpose? The international humanitarian sector needs greater diversity of approaches, funding sources, and thinking to confront its many challenges. So before we'll jump in, we'll take it back a step and think through, what do we mean when we mean diversity and inclusion? So whilst commonly perceived as a matter of gender and race, diversity extends beyond the demographic categories. It encompasses differences between individuals according to gender, age, disability, cultural background, sexual orientation, and social and economic background, profession, education, work experiences, and organisational roles. In recent years, organisational scholars have increasingly distinguished between visible and invisible diversity. The former refers to easily noticeable inherent attributes such as race, gender, and age, and the latter refers to acquired differences in personality, attitudes, and values. It's both these sources of diversity are presumed to have an impact on leadership opportunities and leadership effectiveness. It's important to note that it is also about making sure that organisations are drawing on their diversity and fostering an environment that is inclusive. It is both diversity and inclusion that are needed to generate organisational success. So what the research is trying to do is trying to test two hypotheses that we've come up with in our framing paper. And the two hypotheses are that organisations with more diverse and inclusive humanitarian leadership teams, A, make better decisions, generate more innovative solutions and products, and build greater trust, and that organisations with more diverse and inclusive humanitarian leadership teams also A, deliver more inclusive response operations, and B, engage more meaningfully with and are more accountable to affected populations. What we do know so far is that diverse leadership teams are widely understood to generate a variety of benefits, including an enhanced ability to solve complex problems. However, such benefits have rarely been tested within the humanitarian sector. As I mentioned, our framing paper for this research, titled Drawing on Our Diversity, which was published in 2018 and available on our website, sought to answer the question, how could drawing on our diversity support more effective humanitarian action? The discussion paper summarised what is currently known about diversity and humanitarian leadership and aimed to identify how the two intersect in the international humanitarian system. And as I mentioned, despite the significance of diversity to the humanitarian sector, the literature suggests that the humanitarian leadership is not adequately diverse across gender, ethnicity, race, disability, or age. For example, the Humanitarian Report Index has described the lack of women in key decision-making positions in donor organisations and the UN. Other research suggests that women are greatly underrepresented in humanitarian leadership, with women comprising only 31% of UN humanitarian coordinators, and within the UN more broadly, women comprise only 27% of employees at the highest professional level. And what the paper found that was in contrast to the private sector, the humanitarian sector has done little to track and understand the impact of diverse leadership. So the private sector has been able to directly link things like business performance, innovation, talent retention, improved decision-making, better governance and risk management, and their global image and trust to the diversity and inclusiveness of leadership teams. Available literature and anecdotal evidence does suggest, and our framing paper proposed, that failing to draw on the diversity potential of the humanitarian leadership is to the detriment of humanitarian effectiveness. So what have we done? So this report, Data on Diversity, Humanitarian Leadership Under the Spotlight, which will be available later this month, draws on findings from the State of Diversity Survey, which was a survey on the diversity and inclusiveness of humanitarian leadership globally. It provides data on who fills humanitarian leadership roles and the impact that has on organisational performance. It represents a first step in a research process designed to unpack the relationship between diverse and inclusive leadership and effective humanitarian action. The research findings that I'll present today and that will be in the report enable us to shift the discussion from potentials and possibilities to realities and facts. They give an understanding of the current composition of humanitarian leadership teams and their impact, allowing the sector to reflect on how we recruit and compose leadership teams, how we measure their success, and how we give teams the skills and tools to ensure inclusive leadership. So how did we do it? So we, as I mentioned, there was a global survey that went out to humanitarian globally and was available in 5 languages, and we had just under 1,500 responses. Who we heard from. So as you can see on the screen, we heard from a wide range of actors from a number of different agencies across 115 countries for all different positions, different age range, and different genders as well. And you can see that the 115 countries was global and wasn't concentrated in any one particular area. So what do the results tell us? Importantly, most respondents perceive that humanitarian leadership teams are not currently diverse or inclusive. So as you can see, 38% of respondents perceive their humanitarian leadership teams as diverse, and only 42% of respondents perceive their humanitarian leadership teams as inclusive. There was also an interesting gender difference in the perceptions of humanitarian sector leadership teams. Men have a significantly more positive perception of the diversity and inclusiveness of their leadership teams, with 54% of men surveying think that their leadership team is mostly or very diverse, and only 28% of women thinking the same. As you can also see on the screen, that perceptions of diversity and inclusion also vary between types of organisations. You've got national NGOs are actually the only type of organisation that had a majority of respondents who feel their leadership team is mostly or very diverse and inclusive. So although the finding of most humanitarian staff perceiving that their leadership teams were not diverse and inclusive, what we did find is that those that were those that did have diversity and inclusion are also leadership teams that tended to perform better. And we measured a good performance through a number of factors. So as you can see, it was decision making, managing risk, promoting innovation, listening and acting upon the views of colleagues, reflecting the diversity of the communities that they work within, and to listen and act upon the views of the communities. So there's a clear relationship here between the diversity. When you have more diverse and inclusive humanitarian leadership teams, you have better leadership practice. Some of the statistics is that 81% of respondents who perceive their leadership teams to be diverse and inclusive also perceive those teams to make decisions well. We had 78% of respondents who perceive their leadership team to be diverse and inclusive also perceive their teams to listen and act upon the views of colleagues. And another example is 73% of respondents who perceive their leadership teams to be diverse and inclusive also perceive those teams to listen and act upon the views of communities. And so one way of thinking about this is through the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, which has been at the forefront for the sector recently. So particularly since the sexual abuse scandals that affected the reputation and brand of not only those organisations directly involved, but the entire humanitarian sector. And there's been a great deal of internal sector reflection and action since. And what we've found is that PSEA is a really important aspect of strong risk management. And it's, now there's clear evidence to show that risk is managed better by diverse teams. And so if you have more diverse and inclusive humanitarian leadership teams, your risk mitigation and management of PSEA issues is more likely to be strong. Now, what we also found was that international staff are 1.5 times more likely to fill the most senior humanitarian leadership roles than local staff. As you can see, only 60% of the most senior leadership roles are currently filled by international staff. Interestingly, INGOs have a significantly higher percentage of local staff in the most senior humanitarian leadership positions than the UN. This is important, and despite the fact that 93% of humanitarian personnel are actually local staff. The research found that several barriers prevent local staff moving into senior humanitarian leadership roles. These include different expectations of senior national staff versus international staff, both from staff within the country and headquarters, a lack of training and development opportunities, an aversion to risk by organisations, and really limited support. And it was these barriers that often led to a narrow pipeline for national staff to actually move into some of these leadership roles. What we also found was that women are underrepresented in the most senior humanitarian leadership roles. 57% of the most senior leadership positions in the surveyed organisations are occupied by men and 43% by women. However, women are overrepresented in project level leadership, occupying 68% of those positions. However, as you can see through the pipeline infographic, this gradually declines with seniority. It's also important to note that the gender composition of humanitarian leadership is more heavily male-dominated in countries with a high or extreme security risk. And it was these security issues that can reduce women's representation. So, for example, men dominated overall leadership positions in these countries, filling 60% of leadership positions. In countries with high and extreme security risks, men filled 69% of the most senior leadership positions, 55% of project leadership positions, and 56% of program leadership. And, interviewees also felt like high security risk contexts often led to the exclusion of women. I did also want to note that our survey did not collect data on sexual orientation and gender diversity due to some of the ethical considerations and challenges associated with designing a question that was cross-cultural and applied globally across the 5 languages. Nonetheless, we do recognise the importance of acknowledging some of the challenges that people that sexual and gender minorities do experience. The global scope of humanitarian work means that there are many contexts in which particular sexual behaviours or gender representations are highly stigmatised and in some cases illegal, hampering or preventing the deployment of sexual and gender minority staff. Humanitarian organisations must consider how to balance staff safety with equal opportunity. Organisations should take every step to ensure that disclosure will not harm career opportunities. They should also be clear that deployment decisions will be based on up-to-date information and made in consultation with the employee. And there's more information on this in the report. The next finding was that persons with a disability are underrepresented in both the humanitarian sector and humanitarian leadership. As you can see, 4% of humanitarian leadership roles are occupied by people who identify as having a disability. This is in contrast to global data indicating that approximately 15% of the world's population do have a disability, highlighting a significant lack of representation. What we also found was that organisations found challenges around hiring people with disabilities, and that's further explored in the report. The next finding was that lower socioeconomic status can be a barrier to entering into the humanitarian sector. 69% of respondents across all positions in the sector have a master's degree as their highest level of education, and 21% had an undergraduate degree as their highest level of education. The survey also asked about the educational status of parents as a proxy indicator for socioeconomic status, as long as in addition to their own qualifications. And it found that across all positions in the sector, 57% of parents had either a university degree or higher. Stakeholders reflected on the fact that socioeconomic background is one of the most defining features of the pipeline in the humanitarian sector. As the sector has become more competitive, it has zeroed in on groups of people with specific educational backgrounds and also specific opportunities, such as being able to undertake unpaid work. So the evidence is mounting. Diverse and inclusive leadership teams improve organisational performance and response effectiveness. But where to now? You can use this report to do things like raise awareness, reflect on teams, and advocate. So raise awareness is around raising awareness within your organisation and within the sector as to what the benefits are of diverse and inclusive leadership teams. It's also an opportunity to reflect inward on the compositions of your leadership teams and how they are formed and how decisions are made, and to actually advocate for a shift in organisational culture, in organisational policies and procedures that actually advocate for and support diversity and inclusion. Phase 2 of the research, which we're about to undertake, will explore existing organisational approaches to diverse and inclusive leadership for a key issue or context, nominated by each research partner organisation. And our research partners are across UN agencies, INGOs, and a number of other actors. This will take an action research approach with the partner organisation to explore the current landscape and develop test approaches to improve organisational diversity and inclusion. And the research approach will be jointly developed with both our research partners and HAG to reflect the partner priorities and needs. And we're really keen to make sure that this is research that is able to be used by the sector more broadly, and to start to build that evidence base as to why diversity and inclusion within leadership teams is really, really crucial for the sector. So as I mentioned, the report is out in the next couple of weeks. If you're interested in being a research partner or in the research more broadly, please feel free to get in touch. The research is intended to provoke thought and contribute to conversations regarding humanitarian leadership and the sector more broadly. I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day. As I mentioned, please do get in touch with myself if you'd like to chat through the research or be sent any of the framing papers, or if you'd like to be on our mailing list for when the research is launched. Really looking forward to hearing how the rest of the day went. And again, thank you for listening.